Hi everyone, this is Phil Travis here, and this is History 445 here at EOU, Post-War Europe. This week we are reading from our textbook, our Jute book, chapter 8 and 9. These are the first two chapters at the beginning of the second section. We're particularly going to be examining the 1950s, a period of, ironically, paradoxically, a period of pretty significant military buildup and military arms buildup, particularly in Europe, but yet one that also was met with development of stability across Europe. And so our readings deal particularly with issues like the issue of whether or not to rearm Germany, the issue with NATO, with creating a European defense community, with the development of nuclear weapons as well and their distribution across Europe. We're also going to look at the Warsaw Pact or the Soviet Union a little bit this week. My presentation this week is on the Soviet Empire. And we're particularly going to look at uprisings as well in Poland and Hungary, which occur in the late 1950s within the Soviet Empire. And I want to look at these as two examples of sort of some of the problems with the Soviet Empire and why reform after the death of Stalin leads to violence in these particular areas. So we're going to look a little bit at post-war Europe in the 1950s, and we're going to look at sort of the establishment of a more permanent and militarized divide of Europe and some of the issues within the Soviet bloc, as well as some of the factors for how West German society develops, as well, for example. So there's no quiz this week. We have our midterm next week, and I will get a study guide up for you for the midterm soon. But we'll have a midterm next week. And then the following week, we'll have our paper proposals due. So be thinking about what you want to do your papers on for the following week. So I'll get a study guide up for you soon for the test. The test is next week. It covers all the materials we've covered so far in class. So of course I'll get you a study guide hopefully no later than Wednesday this week. I'll try to have it before then. So use that and look at that over, and just be thinking about the test, which will come up at the end. It'll be due at the end of week 5, and then the paper proposal at the end of week 6. No quiz this week, just our usual discussion. Remember, make your first post by Thursday. I want to see activity, 2 replies, 1 post at minimum, and activity over 2 separate days for full credit, beginning no later than Thursday. Okay. So here's the factoid for this week. Remember, extra credit factoid. Just email me this factoid no later than Wednesday by midnight. I'll give you an extra point on one of our exams by the end of the term. So the extra credit factoid is this. Today, we still see the sort of oddity of having in Europe nations that do not own nuclear weapons, but could have the ability to create them for their own, but yet possess them in their borders. So today, across Europe, there's 5 nations that possess upwards, I think it's 150 U.S.-supplied nuclear weapons. And these weapons are in countries like in countries like Belgium. Brussels is the capital of Belgium. They're located in places like Belgium, particularly Germany, Italy. The presence of these weapons is very interesting, and it very much links back to what we're studying this week. Of course, France theoretically has nuclear weapons. Great Britain has its own nuclear weapons. Of course, Russia has its own nuclear weapons. The United States has its own nuclear weapons. But as we see the development and the need to defend Europe and rearm Europe through NATO, as we see that develop alongside the Warsaw Pact in the 1950s, there was, a belief held by many that nuclear weapons could be, a real sort of ultimate tool in preventing a threat from Eastern Europe. So if you're in Western Europe, and vice versa. And of course, at the same time, there was a great deal of fear from particularly the French at allowing Germany to rearm in its own right and or to develop its own nuclear weapons, which of course Konrad Adenauer had at one time briefly sought for Germany in the late 50s. And so as a result of this dilemma, the United States through NATO would provide weapons which the Germans were trained in, the use and deployment of these weapons. But the United States would deploy these weapons across in these countries that, like Germany, is a country that, absolutely could make its own nuclear weapons if it really wanted to. It has the resources, it has the know-how, but has repudiated that and has pledged that it will not do that. But yet, despite that pledge, despite the fact that even transporting nuclear munitions across Germany is theoretically banned, because of NATO, the United States does store some B-61 nuclear bombs in Germany that are designed as a potential weapon to be used if there was a major war with the Soviet Union or with Russia against NATO. And so the factoid is this, that today there remain, I believe it's upwards of 50 B-61 nuclear bombs, it's something like that, in Germany today, that while Germany denounces the possession and use of nuclear weapons, and these weapons are not owned by Germany, and Germany is not producing them, they are nonetheless maintained and stored in Germany, and if there was a major war against Germany, against NATO states, those weapons would be available to the German Luftwaffe to use in combat if it was a necessary decision made by NATO. So we have this interesting scenario where while France and Great Britain are nuclear nations, Germany is not, but yet through the United States there exists in Germany still to this day a relatively small amount of nuclear weapons in the instance that there could be a major conflict against NATO. All right, guys, let's have a great week. Email me that factoid no later than Wednesday.